Hello and welcome to Civics, a program on Arlington Independent Media. I'm Michael Shea, the host of this episode of Civics, a program where we meet people who have been involved in their community in a variety of different ways. We like to say that we hope you're both informed and inspired by this program. And today we're very glad to be joined by Joe Warren, who's been involved with the Arlington community for quite a number of years now. He was a candidate for county board, and he also has been serving on the Transit Advisory Committee, advising the county on transportation issues. So Joe Warren, thank you very much.
Pleased to meet you, Michael.
All right. Now, Joe, let's kind of go back to the beginning if we can.
Yes.
What do you think of as the first time you were individually involved with your community?
Well, actually, it wasn't until I got to the retirement age, because generally, is probably true with most people, that they work a lot and then they get tired when they're home and they really don't have that many activities, and that was true with me, even after I moved to Arlington. But right around retirement time, I decided to get involved and had the opportunity as well. So one of the first things I did was attend some of the Arlington County Republican Committee meetings and got involved that way with the campaign with John Faber's campaign for Arlington County Sheriff, and I think it was 1999. And helped out there, and I became more and more interested in doing some activities like that because I'd never done that before in my life. And I feel that as a former history teacher that I should do this, I should get involved. You know, that's one thing to talk about history or talk about being involved in government affairs, especially if you're interested in that, and then not do anything about it. Right. So that was one of the incentives I had to actually get involved. So it started in 1990 with Faber's campaign, and then it went on. I actually joined the Republican committee a year later or so, and then in 2006 became a committee member. I'm also a precinct captain in 2006, and I still am precinct captain in my area, which is in the southwestern part of Arlington, near Wakefield High School.
Now, you talk retirement. Now, you had put in a career at the GAO as an economist, working on transportation issues
mostly
in your professional life.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I was in GAO for 23 years, and of those years, about 19 were involved in transportation in one way or another. They had a policy at the time that if you spent too much time in one area, you had to rotate to something else. So I went to agriculture for a while and found that interesting because there was a lot of economics involved. In fact, at the time, the Congress had passed a law which would allow farmers more of an opportunity to free farm, that is, to farm what they wanted and plant what they wanted, so that there was an important bill to do that, and that had a lot of economic consequences. So I worked with some people at our agriculture site on that. But my main interest was transportation because in graduate school I really focused on industrial organization with an application to transportation issues.
Right. Okay, so what were you, going back to maybe your graduate school days, what were you like as a student? What was motivating you?
Well, actually, I can go back a little bit farther. I mentioned I was a history teacher. I actually majored in history in undergraduate school, and then I taught for 2 years after the Army. So I was in ROTC in college and then went into the Army's, what was then called the Transportation Corps, interestingly enough.
I'm sensing a pattern in your life.
Well, that was just a fortuitous circumstance because I didn't realize it would lead to the interest that I would have later. And actually, the Transportation Corps has, for many years, been abolished. It's now part of an overall logistics thing within the U.S. Army. But I was in the Army for 3 years and in the Transportation Corps and had a number of management positions, and I became more involved with that subsequently as a result of my Army experience. I taught for 2 years, leaving the Army, and then went to graduate school and changed into economics because of my Army experience in management. And with the focus on transportation, because at the time that I went into graduate school, there were major things happening in transportation, primarily the bankruptcy of the Penn Central Railroad, which at the time in 1970 was the largest corporate failure in U.S. history. Many people don't realize that.
I did not realize that.
And there was a building up, a kind of an upwelling of a need for deregulation of the railroads, especially in the East, because of competition with trucks and with airlines in the case of passengers. So something needed to be done, and I wanted to be a part of that and felt that that was the time to do it. So that's...
It's interesting you shifted from the history of economics. I used to work with someone who talked about studying politics as an undergraduate and deciding I really should study economics because economics really is what moves the world. He went to graduate school for economics, and he got done with that, and he realized, no, he got out into the law and said, no, politics really does tend to move the world more. He realized he'd been going in the wrong direction. But so you started to get involved with the party and helping on campaigns.
Right.
What were some of the things that you did? What's good?
By did you mean while I was
as a volunteer?
As a volunteer. Well, as a precinct captain, the responsibilities typically are to man the precinct, to physically be there and hand out literature, and to organize the time for other people so that the entire time is covered from 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. actually, when polls typically open until 7 p.m. So that's another responsibility there. But generally, or I should say more specifically, I started advising the committee of the Republican Party on transportation issues. So about 3 or 4 years after I was paying attention or doing some general things like helping other candidates, the Columbia Pike streetcar became a viable issue. By that I mean that there was a July report. The July '05 report was the first major report on the streetcar project. And in going through that, both as a member of the TAC and also as a member of the committee, I started talking to various people in the party and saying that there is a serious issue that you should look at more specifically, and actually advise them. I helped to get a resolution passed by the Republican Party in, I think it was February, no later than March of 2006, just a few months before the board voted on the Columbia streetcar, to vote against it. And they did. They came up with a resolution against it. So I was very proud of that. There's a real practical application of being interested. And so that was clearly the direction that I wanted to go in, to use my background in GAO, which really was in a variety of transportation issues. And what I did in GAO was, now the Government Accountability Office, it was the General Accounting Office when I was there, was to do pretty much the same thing. For example, in Amtrak, that I did analysis of their business plan in their first business plan, which was 1996, and found a number of problems. So that's the kind of thing I did. But I worked on several Amtrak jobs, a highway project, a project involving shipping from oil from Alaska to California and other places. So a wide variety of issues. And one of the things that you'll learn there is you make sure of your notes and make sure that what you're saying you can back up. And that's been one of the characteristics that I've had, that when I advise people to do something, I make very sure that I know what I'm talking about and I can back up what I'm saying. And so I've had a lot of credibility with the party.
Right. And you got involved with the committee about 7 or 8 years ago? You got appointed to the committee. The Transportation Advisory Committee.
Yes, 8.5 years ago.
8.5 years ago. Let's talk about that. How did you?
Well, it was because actually it was even before the Columbia Pike streetcar and before the report was published in July of '05. It was just general transportation issues, and I felt that I could contribute there. So I sent a letter to the county manager, and the committees are responsible. You're appointed by the county manager as distinct from the commissions. They're appointed by the board. Commission members are appointed by the board. Important difference. And so because of my background, I think, and interest, that I was appointed and have been on that.
Have you been on any of the commissions? Have you just been in the committee?
Just the committee, because the committee has taken so much time that I didn't have time really for anything else.
Right, no, that makes sense. I don't know if maybe some other time. So, but then you decided to run for board.
Yes.
So what motivated you to want to run?
Well, frankly, it was the experience with the Columbia Pike streetcar. I was very disappointed in what I found and the response of the board. Basically, following the resolution by the Republican Party, I did some independent analysis that is as part of my responsibilities, doing analysis of this huge report about 1.25 inches thick. And I found a number of things that were of real concern. That FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, which is responsible for approving any funds from the federal government to the county, they had indicated they were going to turn down the county's request for money the first time. So that would be after that first report was published. And that's what really, I guess, energized me and got me more interested, because I testified before the board that I had found some very serious problems with the report, not the report itself, but with the consequences of the report.
Right.
And I found that there was no response. I testified and I said, I'm very concerned, and I also found that there was interference in the report by a committee board member that I didn't mention, but I know who he was. And I figured that the board members would be outraged. And instead, there was a total lack of response. And to me, that was an indication that we don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And that got me very interested. I said, okay, this is more serious than I realized, and I decided actually the following year, although I was asked, I mean, I didn't jump in, I talked with people in the Republican committee, and they said, you know, would you consider running? And I said, well, because of this project, I think that I could serve a useful purpose here in running. And by the way, I didn't run by myself. I ran with Mike McMenamin, so it was the two of us.
All right.
There were
two
of us.
seats were open.
Two seats were open at the time,
Right.
and Mary Hines was running, and also Walter Tejada.
Right. So did you have fun running?
I did. I
Yeah,
found
that's
that...
what I always ask people that run for
Right,
office.
right. Well, that's a good question to ask. There were some frustrating things about it. I think many of the so-called, quote, debates really were not debates. They were, I have a statement to make, and then the other person has a statement to make, and there was very little interaction or debate and discussion. And I found that disappointing, and often the turnout was very poor, maybe 15 or 20 people at some debates. On other occasions, we had 50 or 60 people, and on one occasion we had 2 debates scheduled on one night, and that just happened to be the greatest turnout. So we had to say sorry after presenting our particular points of view. We had to leave. So that was fouled up. They needed some work on that to reduce the number, and I think they did subsequently to that election. I think they went from 10 or 11 at the time. I think they made it down to 8 or so, and they've consolidated some of the civic association areas in one debate. So I learned that was exciting to actually talk about the streetcar and other issues. I don't mean to imply I was solely focusing on the streetcar.
Right,
I did a lot of learning about other issues as well.
And the other aspects in terms of fundraising and the various things that involved the campaign, did you have to sort of learn on the fly, or was it?
Well, I did. I had some advice in the beginning, limited, but and I was my own campaign manager, I'm proud to say, and my own treasurer.
Okay.
And I only ran $350 into the hole, and I knew I was going to do that. That was putting some signs. That was the very last thing of the campaign, but
Right.
I managed things very carefully.
Right.
Since I was knowledgeable about that, I would be rather embarrassed. And I'm proud to say that I spent 50 cents, about $3,000, which is about 50 cents for every vote I got, compared to the other candidate I was running with, who spent $2 for every vote. So I promised everybody, I said,
What a spendthrift.
I'm going to be more efficient than anybody else, and I was in the campaign.
Well, that's good. Well, so you came away. Now, how did that whole experience affect your own further engagement in the community or on the advisory committee? Did it change your thinking in any way?
Well, one of the things you asked me if I was disappointed or in some aspects of it, and I was. The most important, and I thought the most intelligent question was by a high school student from Yorktown. When we were talking about the streetcar, and Mr. Tejada said that the people want the streetcar, and I said, and he was referring to the design charrettes and some other public meetings where people would express their views. And I said, well, you know, this is a self-selected sample, not a random sample. And I talked about that. And I was disappointed that the people, the adults, didn't ask me more about that. It seemed to be, from their point of view, a foregone conclusion. And, well, you know, so what? So that was disappointing on that. And as a result of that disappointment, I became more committed to the TAC, really, and to doing more, following issues more, and became more convinced that more information is needed, that a lot of people simply didn't know. And that was one of the things I discovered in the debates and in the campaign, is that it's a long process of really informing people. You don't just say something and say, okay, I said this and now I expect people to believe me. You have to say it over and over, and you have to provide other examples and in different forums. So I participated in a debate with county staff and some other people in 2008, sponsored by the Columbia Heights Civic Association, and then I had another debate, and I've given presentations before the Organized Women of Arlington. That was not a debate, that was more a presentation with somebody from the Columbia Pike revitalization organization and participating. So I started getting more involved in that aspect of it.
Right. No, that is very interesting. Now, it's also, it's probably fair to say that in terms of transportation as an issue, you genuinely find it interesting. You're willing to read a lot of reports.
Right.
So that's probably good advice for anybody who's thinking about getting engaged in the community, you know, work on an issue that you're engaged by that you find interesting.
Yeah, that I think is one of the problems in communicating, because you have the county, the board and the staff really saying the same thing. They're saying, you know, and backed up by the consultant report, of course, that the streetcar is really good. And then how do people respond to that? I mean, how do they do analysis? How do they look into ridership projections or cost projections, or learn about the assumptions that the report is based on? Well, it takes a lot of time to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't have time until I basically retired. So I can understand that there has to be somebody or some group that is really helping people learn about issues. And that's really what motivates me, you know, what has motivated me in the last 5 or 6 years.
Right.
But that's difficult. It takes somebody that I happen to have the background to do this as a result of my graduate school experience, and also many jobs in GAO to do it. So I brought that with me.
Right.
And I could apply it basically pretty quickly.
So looking back on the way you've been engaged, what do you think has maybe been the biggest success? What do you most?
Well, the biggest success was, I'd have to say, was the analysis that I did that contributed to FTA, the Federal Transit Administration's decision to turn down Arlington's request for $60 million in money for the streetcar. And I did that by basically being involved. I made a verbal presentation at some of the public meetings and a detailed written presentation that was submitted to Pike Transit, and they were the organization that was acting as the contractor for the project, and then they further submitted those comments to FTA for evaluation. So there were many, many comments. There were something like 140 people, I believe, that made written comments, quite a few. But my approach was based upon the fact that the county applied under the Small Starts program, which meant a limit of $249 million. And if they exceeded that, then the project would have to go into what's called the New Starts program, which is much bigger, has much more money, but also a lot more data requirements, and it takes more time to get approval. So the fact that I realized that the county had not come up with a cost estimate for the maintenance facility, and had actually changed the location of the maintenance facility, which was a big surprise since we in the TAC had been told something different for several years. So in pursuing that, I found that there was no cost estimate, and I presented that information to FTA, and that came back. The county was turned down. FTA said that the minimum cost estimate was now $310 million, way above the $250 million threshold for that. That's the proudest accomplishment, is persevering in that, even though all the forces in the county, the board and the county staff were certainly for it. And even in the TAC meetings that I didn't get much support except in the final vote. I mean, most people tend to be rather quiet. They don't like to debate or disagree with county staff. So that's
and this is last year? Is when this happening?
It is. Yes, it was last year. Yes, it was last year.
So looking back, what has been maybe a frustration or a disappointment for you?
You mean with the TAC, or
no, just with community involvement in general?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I'll try to limit my answers. I mentioned running for the election, I was disappointed about the lack of questions.
That probably covered it, yeah.
Well, we didn't, because that was just the election. But the biggest disappointment was, I'd say, with the county board, because the lack of any response. When I testified in April of '06 about the study and about interference by a board member in the study and other problems, and not getting any response, that demonstrated to me that, quote, the fix was in, that nobody wanted to bring it up. You know, it was televised. They didn't want anybody, or as few people as possible, in the county to know what was going on. They didn't want any dissension. And that is not the way it should be. I've often thought that the Arlington Public Schools should have a requirement that the seniors should have to attend at least 2 board meetings where there's some major issue being discussed, to see how things don't work. Because one of the things I think in Arlington is the Arlington way tends to be that we do everything by consensus. There's no disagreement, whatever the board says, and there's even, they often agree beforehand. We have no discussion in public or debate in public. And that is very unfortunate, I think, because the people are denied the opportunity of learning about issues. That's the number one disappointment. And I would say that the second disappointment is, maybe it's a corollary of that people are dissuaded from actually getting involved because they say that, well, the fix is in. We know it doesn't matter. I know some people on the TAC left for that reason. One woman who was a member, actually employed by a consulting firm, later the World Bank, she left and she said, it doesn't matter what we say, they're going to do whatever they want. And that's another thing I found very disappointing, was just the difficulty in trying to get people interested, because I think that from their point of view, they thought that, well, things have already been predetermined and why bother?
Yeah. Do you think we need more more opportunities to have discussion and engagement that's not in the context of a county board work session? Is that something that maybe could make a difference?
Well,
I know we do have a lot of meetings in Arlington.
And they did on the Columbia Pike streetcar, and also on the complete streets there have been several. It's not, actually I had a unique experience. I was invited by the county information office last Friday to go up there and tell them, or give them my suggestions on how to improve contact and communication with the public. So I was talking to them about problems in the streetcar and other issues like the super stops. You probably heard of that, the fiasco with that. And we were not advised of that, of the real cost in the advisory committee. So here we are, a committee that was set up by the county manager to advise the county manager, and we're not even getting relevant information. The design had already been selected before we were even told about it. So that's, I would say, is the second greatest disappointment, is that the committee structure that I found and the use of that is very limited. I've been trying for 2.5 years, for example, to get an agenda, or the agendas of the TAC, especially considering the importance of the streetcar, which has been the greatest political upheaval I've seen in my 27 years in Arlington. Simply getting it posted on the Department of Environmental Services website. And it took 2.5 years. Now we were told in the last meeting that, well, perhaps in the next meeting in February that it will be on there. Well, why? Why, when the charter to the TAC says that we are to advise the county manager and to serve as a forum for public discussion, where the public doesn't even know what we do?
And it's public meetings.
And it's public meetings.
It's a public meeting, yeah.
Right, but nobody, I won't say nobody, but the only people that come who are not committee members are a few people that I tell or suggest to come, and somebody else, and occasionally we have a few people drifting in. And listen, and the debate that we had on the streetcar I thought was priceless. Yeah. It was excellent on both sides. And yet, who knows about that? The only record is, fortunately, their county staff takes notes, and we do have those notes on the meeting, but often the notes are summary. They're not, you can't put everything down that happened in a 2-hour meeting.
No, that would be hard.
So that would say that was the second disappointment.
Well, so who, let's go back to kind of big picture. Who inspires you? Who's inspired you most in terms of community service and engagement like this?
I think it was people on the Republican committee. Wayne Kubicki has been, for many years, he's served as a kind of an overseer for the county budget, and he often picks up a lot of details that other people miss. And I admire that. He's been involved for many years. He served, I think, for many years, in fact, I know he did. Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission. Right. And I think on possibly another committee or two, Jim Pebley, another example, he served on many commissions. And Francis Finta, who's been involved in everything from being, I think, the treasurer for the party, to organizing the county during the setup, during the period of the summer, the county fair, for example. She's often advised that. So I think those three people. And
she also had a large role to play with the Civic Federation.
Yes.
Over the years.
Yes, she did.
Huge. I mean, a lot of time she put into that.
I think she was president for 1 year or so, and put a lot of additional time. So given that, I was very happy to have received last year the Delanis Finta Award, too, for community involvement. That was really something I didn't.
And Delanis is Leon Delanis?
Leon Delanis.
Who had been Community, he'd been engaged in the community.
He
I'm
was a
forgetting
member of the party,
Yeah.
and involved in many activities before my time here, so I
Right.
don't really
Right.
know. Of course, Francis I know, of course, but Leon
I think he
did
was
not.
president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he did some other,
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
community work. No, and then that is a very high honor to get. And so, what is next for you?
Well,
would you
I hope.
say?
I don't know what's going to happen with the streetcar. I can say this, that it's very exciting what's happening as a result of the election of Libby Garvey. And as you probably know, there's this group called Arlingtonians for Sensible Transit that has arisen as a result of that, because
I've heard
once
of
you
it,
get
yeah.
somebody on the board who's opposed, it really forces other people to pay attention. And this group now is more than 600 strong, and was started, I believe, by Peter Russello, who's the former chairman of the Democrat Party in Arlington, and that's quite an accomplishment. So he has come out strongly against the streetcar, and there's this new coalition that with the Greens and the Republican Party, and a lot of Democrats basically backing John Vstad for this special election for county
So, are you
board.
involved with that coalition?
I am.
Okay.
I remember I was one of the first ones in there. I couldn't run fast enough to meet Peter and others. It's really exciting to see other people come along, because I can't.
Yeah.
When I was there almost alone, I don't mean to suggest I was the only one against the streetcar, but
No.
the only one doing a lot of analysis. And when you're almost alone
Yeah.
doing that, it gets to be very lonely and you want some help. So I'm very excited about that, and that's one of the things I certainly hope to help out is the AST group and continue my role on the advisory committee in the near future anyway.
Right.
And there are other issues like the Arlington transit. There are big plans to expand that. That's something we also deal with, and then Metro's budget too, so there are other major issues.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you're staying engaged in transportation and bringing that experience and that careful analysis into the equation. I also want to thank our crew, our volunteer crew here in Arlington Independent Media. We've had David Cervantes on camera. We've had Hilary Freer and Steve Cordle in the booth. But most of all, I do want to thank Joe Warren for
My pleasure.
working so hard for so long to make your community a better place to live.
Thank
you very much.
Mike. I
All right,
appreciate the
sure.
opportunity.